The sound of my timesheet being ripped in half echoed through the entire nursing station like a gunshot. 23 other employees watched in stunned silence as my boss, Director Michael Harrison, tore my overtime documentation into confetti and let the pieces flutter to the floor like snow in hell. 3 months of meticulously recorded extra shifts, weekend emergencies, and holiday coverage gone. Just like that. But what he didn't know was that I had photocopied everything the night before. "Listen up, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that makes your skin crawl. "Memorial General doesn't pay fantasy overtime for nurses who can't manage their time properly. You clocked out at 7:30 last Tuesday, not 9:15 like this fairy tale suggests." The fluorescent lights above us hummed with an almost electric tension. I could smell the antiseptic mixed with the coffee burning in the break room pot, but all I could taste was the metallic flavor of rage coating my tongue. My hands trembled as I stared at the destroyed papers scattered across the polished linoleum floor of the main corridor. "Mr. Harrison, I have security camera footage showing me leaving at 9:20 that night. I stayed late because Mrs. Patterson in room 314 was coding and nothing." He cut me off with a wave of his manicured hand. "Security footage gets erased every 72 hours. You know that. What you don't seem to understand is that this hospital runs on efficiency, not on nurses who pad their hours for extra cash." The other nurses pretended to be busy with their charts, but I could feel their eyes on us. Maria Rodriguez, who worked the night shift, kept glancing nervously between her computer screen and our confrontation. James Wright, one of the few male nurses on our floor, had stopped mid-stride near the medication cart, clearly eavesdropping. Even Dr. Patel, who was reviewing patient files at the nearby desk, had gone completely still. That's when it hit me. The nervous glances, the sudden silence, the way everyone seemed afraid to even breathe. This wasn't the first time Harrison had done this. These people had seen this exact same scene play out before, probably multiple times. How many other nurses had been standing exactly where I was, watching their hard work get literally torn to pieces? "You know what, Mr. Harrison?" I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "You're absolutely right about one thing. This hospital does run on efficiency, and an efficient person would keep backup copies of important documents." His smug expression faltered for just a second, just long enough for me to see the flicker of uncertainty cross his face. "I have photocopies of every single timesheet, every single shift change, every single emergency overtime call I've worked for the past 6 months. I also have the emails you sent authorizing that overtime. And I have something else you might find interesting." The silence in that hallway became so thick you could have cut it with a scalpel. Even the usual sounds of the hospital, the beeping monitors, the rolling gurneys, the distant conversations, seemed to fade into white noise. "What are you talking about?" Harrison's voice had lost its earlier confidence. I reached into my scrubs pocket and pulled out my phone. With deliberate slowness, I opened my voice recorder app and showed him the screen. The recording had been running for the past 4 minutes and 37 seconds. "Everything you just said is now documented, including the part where you admitted that security footage gets conveniently erased every 72 hours. That's interesting, don't you think? Almost like the hospital has a policy designed to eliminate evidence of overtime disputes." Harrison's face went from pale to red to a shade of purple I'd only seen in patients with severe hypertension. The vein in his forehead started throbbing visibly. "Turn that off. Right now." "I don't think so." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. "See, I've been doing some research in my spare time. The Fair Labor Standards Act is very clear about overtime compensation, and there are some hefty penalties for employers who systematically deny legitimate overtime claims. You're walking on very thin ice here, nurse." "No, Mr. Harrison. You are." I bent down and started collecting the pieces of my torn timesheet, making sure every single fragment went into my other pocket. Evidence is evidence, even when it's been shredded. "Maria," I called out to the night nurse who was still pretending to work on her computer. "How many times have you seen Mr. Harrison tear up overtime requests?" Maria's eyes went wide. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, glancing frantically between Harrison and me. I don't." "It's okay," I said gently. "You don't have to answer right now. But when the Department of Labor investigators start asking questions, I hope you'll remember that staying silent makes you complicit in wage theft. The words Department of Labor hit that corridor like a bomb. I could practically hear the collective intake of breath from everyone within earshot. James Wright actually dropped his medication tray, sending pills scattering across the floor with tiny plastic sounds. Harrison stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with what might have been whiskey on his breath at 10 in the morning. You file any kind of complaint, and I'll make sure you never work in another hospital in this state. I have connections you can't even imagine. Is that a threat, Mr. Harrison? Because threatening an employee for exercising their legal rights is also illegal. That's called retaliation, and it comes with its own set of federal penalties. The elevator at the end of the hall dinged, and Chief of Staff Dr. Elizabeth Warren stepped out, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached. She must have sensed the tension because her usual brisk pace slowed as she took in the scene. Harrison standing over me, torn papers on the floor, and half the nursing staff frozen like statues. Is everything all right here? Dr. Warren asked, her sharp eyes moving between Harrison and me. Just a minor scheduling disagreement, Harrison said quickly, his voice suddenly smooth as silk. Nothing that can't be resolved internally. Actually, Dr. Warren, I said, standing up with the pieces of my timesheet in my hand, we were just discussing wage and hour violations. Mr. Harrison was explaining the hospital's policy of denying legitimate overtime claims and destroying documentation. Dr. Warren's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. She looked at the paper fragments in my hand, then at Harrison, then back at me. I see. Mr. Harrison, I think we need to schedule a meeting to review our overtime policies. This afternoon would be good. Of course, Doctor. Always happy to discuss policy improvements. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Dr. Warren, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Department of Labor regarding systematic wage theft at this facility. I have documentation going back 6 months, and I suspect this affects multiple employees across several departments. The hallway went completely silent. Even the ambient hospital noises seemed to stop. Dr. Warren's composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing what looked like genuine concern. That's a serious accusation. Yes, it is. And I have serious evidence to back it up. Harrison tried one more time. Sarah, let's not let a simple misunderstanding escalate into something that could hurt everyone's career here, including yours. I looked around at the faces of my coworkers. These people I'd worked alongside for 3 years. People whose backside covered, whose shifts I'd picked up when they were sick, whose families I knew by name. And I realized they weren't looking at me with anger or betrayal. They were looking at me with something I hadn't expected. Hope. You know what, Mr. Harrison? You're absolutely right. This could hurt a lot of careers, starting with yours. I turned to leave, but then stopped and faced him one more time. Oh, and one more thing. That security footage you mentioned, the stuff that gets erased every 72 hours, I already requested copies from corporate security this morning. Turns out they keep backup files for 6 months. Funny how that works. The look on his face was worth every sleepless night I was about to endure. What was your first reaction when you found out your boss was stealing from you? Hit that subscribe button if you think I did the right thing, or if you've ever had to fight for money you rightfully earned. 3 days later, I was sitting in my Honda Civic in the Memorial General parking garage at 11:30 at night, eating a gas station burrito and planning what might have been the most dangerous investigation of my life. The security cameras couldn't see me from this angle, tucked between 2 ambulances on level B2, but I could see everything I needed through the employee entrance. My shift had ended at 7, but I told everyone I was going home with a headache. Instead, I'd driven around the block exactly 17 times, waiting for the perfect moment to return. The night janitor, Carlos Mendez, had been my unwitting ally for the past 72 hours. Not because he knew what I was doing. God knows I couldn't risk involving anyone else in this mess, but because Carlos had been complaining about his own missing overtime for months. Every conversation we'd had recently somehow circled back to the same theme: hours worked but not paid, documentation that mysteriously disappeared, and a management system that seemed designed to screw over anyone who wasn't wearing a suit and tie. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Rachel in Phoenix. How's the hospital drama going? Did you file that complaint yet? I'd made the mistake of telling her about the confrontation with Harrison, and now she was checking on me every few hours like I was a trauma patient in the ICU. Still gathering evidence, I typed back, "This goes deeper than one asshole supervisor." And it did. Over the past 3 days, I'd started paying attention to conversations I'd previously ignored. Casual comments from housekeeping about missing hours. Nurses from other departments mentioning similar problems with overtime approval. Even some of the lab technicians had stories that made my blood boil. But stories weren't evidence. I needed documentation, and that meant getting into places I had no business being. The employee entrance finally opened, and night shift supervisor Janet Morrison walked out, car keys jangling in her hand. Perfect! Janet always parked on the far side of the garage and took at least 10 minutes to defrost her windshield, even in September. That gave me exactly the window I needed. I slipped out of my car and walked casually toward the building, badge ready. The card reader beeped green, and I was inside. The night shift was skeleton crew, maybe 15 people total for the entire hospital. Most of them would be on patient floors or in the emergency department. The administrative offices on the 3rd floor would be completely empty. The elevator ride felt like it lasted forever. My heart was hammering so hard I was worried it might show up on someone's cardiac monitor. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, the silence was absolute. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie green glow, and my sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum with every step. Harrison's office was locked, but I didn't need to get inside. What I needed was in the shared filing room 2 doors down, the room where all departmental timesheets got processed before going to payroll. The door was always unlocked during business hours, and apparently, night security wasn't concerned about employee time records. Inside, metal filing cabinets lined 3 walls, each labeled with department codes and date ranges. I found what I was looking for in the 3rd cabinet. Nursing, overtime authorization, July-September 2023. My hands were shaking as I opened the drawer and started flipping through manila folders. What I found made my stomach turn. My own timesheets were there, but not the versions I'd submitted. These had been altered, hours crossed out, dates changed, even my signature forged in several places. Worse, I wasn't alone. Maria Rodriguez's overtime from August had been cut by 37 hours. James Wright's weekend differential was completely eliminated. Even Janet Morrison, the night supervisor I'd just seen leaving, had been shorted nearly 60 hours over 2 months. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding a separate folder labeled Administrative Review, Overtime Discrepancies. Inside were photocopied checks showing where that stolen money had gone. Bonus payments to management. Performance incentives for supervisors who kept overtime costs below budget. Harrison's name appeared on 17 different bonus checks, totaling over $43,000. They weren't just stealing our overtime. They were getting rewarded for it. I took pictures of everything with my phone, making sure to capture the document headers, dates, and signatures. The flash seemed impossibly bright in the darkened room, and every click of a camera shutter sounded like a gunshot to my paranoid ears. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots. Definitely security. Moving slowly, methodically, checking doors. I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the filing room, and there was nowhere to hide. The cabinets were too small, the desk too exposed, and the window was 3 stories up with no fire escape. Think, Sarah. Think. I shoved the folders back into place, closed the drawer as quietly as possible, and grabbed a clipboard from the desk. When the security guard's flashlight beam swept through the doorway, I was standing at the filing cabinet with my back to the door, apparently reviewing some urgent documentation. "Excuse me, what are you doing in here?" I turned around slowly, trying to look surprised but not guilty. The guard was someone I didn't recognize, a big guy, maybe mid-50s, with the kind of mustache that suggested he took his job very seriously. "Oh, hi there. I'm Sarah from the cardiac unit. We had a patient transfer emergency, and I needed to grab the overtime authorization for the extra nurses who came in tonight. Dr. Warren asked me to handle the paperwork before morning shift. Please let this work. Please let this work." The guard studied my face, then looked at my badge, then back at my face. Hospital ID photos are universally terrible, but mine was particularly unflattering, and I could see him trying to match the frazzled woman in front of him with the picture of someone having the worst hair day of her life. Cardiac unit, huh? What room number? Shit. He was testing me. I work primarily in the cardiac catheterization lab, but tonight we had overflow patients in rooms 237, 241, and 245. The emergency was a massive MI that came in around 9:15. 63-year-old male complained of chest pain while mowing his lawn in Riverside. His wife drove him here instead of calling an ambulance. The details seemed to satisfy him. Either that, or he didn't want to deal with the paperwork involved in questioning a nurse about patient care decisions. All right, just make sure you sign out at the front desk when you leave. And next time, maybe coordinate with day shift administration for this kind of thing. Absolutely. Thanks for checking on me. It's good to know security is keeping an eye on things up here. He nodded and continued down the hallway, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls like a lighthouse searching for ships in distress. I waited until I heard the elevator ding before allowing myself to breathe normally again. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I went back to the filing cabinet and pulled out every single folder related to overtime processing for the past 6 months. What I found was a systematic pattern of wage theft that went far beyond the nursing department. Housekeeping, laboratory services, dietary, maintenance. Every single department showed the same pattern of altered timesheets and missing overtime payments. The numbers were staggering. Conservative estimate, the hospital had stolen over $200,000 in overtime wages from its employees over the past 6 months alone. And that was just what I could document in one filing cabinet at midnight on a Thursday. But here's what really made my blood boil. There was a memo dated 3 months ago from hospital administration to all department supervisors. The subject line read, Overtime Cost Management Initiative. The contents were basically a blueprint for wage theft, complete with instructions on how to alter timesheets, forge employee signatures, and document the savings as operational efficiency improvements. Harrison wasn't a rogue supervisor. He was following orders from the very top of the hospital hierarchy. I photographed that memo 17 times from different angles, making sure every word was crystal clear. Then I found the distribution list. 12 department heads, including Harrison, had received copies. 12 people were actively participating in systematic wage theft, and they were being financially rewarded for it. My phone buzzed with another text from Rachel. You're scaring me with the radio silence. Text me back, or I'm calling the hospital. Still alive, I typed quickly. Found evidence that's going to change everything. This is bigger than I thought. How much bigger? I looked at the pile of documentation I just photographed, thought about the dozens of employees who'd been systematically robbed, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Federal crime bigger. Multiple felonies bigger. People are going to prison bigger. The elevator dinged again in the distance. Time to go. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, turned off the lights, and walked back toward the elevator with my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. But as I waited for the elevator to arrive, I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead filled me with a grim sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for my own stolen overtime anymore. I was fighting for every single person who'd been robbed by the system. And I was going to win. Because they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd picked the wrong nurse to mess with. The Department of Labor office in downtown Denver smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucratic desperation. I'd been sitting in the same uncomfortable plastic chair for 47 minutes, clutching a manila envelope that contained enough evidence to destroy careers and potentially send people to federal prison. The waiting room was painted that particular shade of institutional beige that seems designed to crush the human spirit, and the fluorescent lighting made everyone look like they were suffering from some kind of wasting disease. Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that comes from dealing with workplace violations all day, appeared in the doorway. I'm investigator Linda Chun. Sorry to keep you waiting. Her office was exactly what you'd expect from a federal employee. Metal desk, filing cabinets that had seen better decades, and a computer that probably ran on Windows 95. But Chun herself radiated competence, and when she opened my envelope and started examining the photographs I'd taken, her expression shifted from professional interest to barely controlled outrage. How many employees are we talking about? She asked after reviewing the first dozen images. At least 67 that I can document. Probably more. The pattern goes back at least 18 months, maybe longer. Chin pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes in handwriting that was surprisingly neat for someone who clearly spent most of her time typing reports. And you have recorded conversations. 3 separate incidents where my supervisor openly admitted to destroying overtime documentation. Plus the conversation where he threatened my employment for filing this complaint. I handed her a flash drive containing the audio files. Chin plugged it into her computer, and we listened to Harrison's voice filling the small office. Security footage gets erased every 72 hours. You know that. Then later, you file any kind of complaint, and I'll make sure you never work in another hospital in the state. This is... Chin paused, searching for the right words. This is textbook wage theft with a side of retaliation. The fact that there's systematic documentation makes this a potential RICO case. RICO, Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. I'd looked it up after finding the administrative memo, but hearing it from a federal investigator made my stomach drop. How long before something happens? I asked. Depends on how cooperative your employer wants to be. We'll start with a formal investigation. Subpoena payroll records, interview employees. If they fight us, Chin shrugged. Could take months. Could take years. And in the meantime, they keep stealing. In the meantime, you keep documenting everything. Every conversation, every denied claim, every piece of evidence. And you be very, very careful. I was walking back to my car when my phone rang. Harrison. Sarah, we need to talk. I thought we already said everything we needed to say. Things have changed. I think there's been a misunderstanding about your overtime situation. Can you come in early today? Say 2 o'clock. It was currently 11:30 in the morning. My shift didn't start until 7 p.m. Why the sudden change of heart, Mr. Harrison? Let's just say that upper management has taken an interest in resolving this matter quickly and amicably. Upper management. They knew. Someone had tipped them off about my Department of Labor visit, or maybe they'd noticed the missing files from the administrative offices. Either way, they were panicking. I'll be there at 2. Excellent. Oh, and Sarah, bring your union representative. This will be a formal meeting. The union representative turned out to be Tom Kowalski, a guy in his early 60s who looked like he'd been fighting workplace battles since the Carter administration. We met in the hospital parking lot 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, and I brought him up to speed on everything I discovered. Jesus Christ, he said after reviewing the photos on my phone. This isn't just overtime violations. This is organized crime. That's what the Department of Labor investigator said. Good. Good that you went to DOL first. Hospital administration is going to try to contain this, make it go away quietly. They'll offer you money, probably a promotion, maybe even a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. And if I take it, then they keep stealing from everyone else, and you become complicit in covering it up. We walked into the hospital together, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and found ourselves in a conference room I'd never seen before. Sitting around a polished oak table were 5 people I recognized and 2 I didn't. Harrison was there, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Dr. Warren, the chief of staff, sat at the head of the table with a stack of documents in front of her. Next to her was someone who was obviously a lawyer, expensive suit, briefcase, and the kind of predatory smile that costs $400 an hour. Sarah, thank you for coming, Dr. Warren began. I believe you know everyone here except for Mr. Phillips from our legal department and Ms. Anderson from Human Resources. The lawyer, Phillips, leaned forward with his hands clasped. Ms. Martinez, we understand there's been some confusion regarding overtime documentation and compensation. We'd like to resolve this matter quickly and fairly. No confusion on my end, I said. Just systematic wage theft. Phillips's smile faltered slightly. That's a very serious accusation. We prefer to think of this as an administrative oversight that we're eager to correct. Administrative oversight. I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos I'd taken. This is a memo from hospital administration instructing supervisors to alter timesheets and forge employee signatures. What exactly is administrative about organized crime? The room went silent. Dr. Warren looked at the phone screen, then at Harrison, then at Phillips. Her expression suggested she was seeing some of this evidence for the first time. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. "Does it matter? What matters is that it exists, it's documented, and it's already in the hands of federal investigators." Phillips cleared his throat. "Ms. Martinez, the hospital is prepared to offer you a settlement package that we believe you'll find very generous. Full compensation for any overtime discrepancies, plus a significant bonus, and a promotion to senior nurse with a substantial salary increase. And in exchange, you would agree not to discuss this matter publicly or pursue any further legal action." Tom Kowalski spoke for the first time since entering the room. "So you want to pay her hush money while continuing to steal from 66 other employees. We're prepared to review all overtime claims hospital-wide," Phillips said smoothly. "This would be a comprehensive resolution. What about the federal investigation that's already underway?" I asked. The lawyer's composure cracked just slightly. "What federal investigation?" I looked around the table at their faces. Harrison looked sick. Dr. Warren looked confused. Phillips looked like someone had just told him his house was on fire. "The Department of Labor investigation that I initiated 3 hours ago. The one where I handed over documented evidence of systematic wage theft, recorded conversations admitting to the destruction of evidence, and a paper trail showing that stolen overtime money was paid out as management bonuses." "You did what?" Harrison's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I exercised my legal right to file a complaint with the appropriate federal agency. The same right that you threatened to destroy my career for exercising." Phillips was frantically scribbling notes on his legal pad. Dr. Warren was staring at Harrison like she was seeing him for the first time. The HR representative, Anderson, looked like she was trying to disappear into her chair. "Ms. Martinez," Phillips said, his voice now strained, "surely we can work something out. The hospital has always been committed to fair labor practices, and if there have been some isolated incidents—" "Isolated incidents?" I interrupted. "I have documentation of over $200,000 in stolen wages across 12 departments over 6 months. That's not isolated. That's systematic." Tom leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression of someone who'd been fighting these battles for decades. "You know what I think? I think this meeting is over. Sarah's already filed her complaint with DOL, which means this is now a federal matter. Any attempt to pressure her to withdraw that complaint constitutes witness intimidation." "Now hold on," Phillips started, but Tom cut him off. "No, you hold on. Your client just offered my member a bribe to cover up federal crimes. That's another felony. How many more do you want to rack up before lunch?" I stood up, and Tom followed my lead. "Dr. Warren, I hope you understand that I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to be paid for the hours I worked. But when your administration decided to steal from hardworking people and then threaten us for speaking up, you made this personal." "Sarah, please," Dr. Warren said. "Can't we find a way to resolve this that doesn't destroy the hospital? You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from your employees." We walked out of that conference room, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I wasn't the victim. I was the one with evidence, federal backing, and the moral authority that comes from being absolutely, unquestionably right. My phone buzzed as we waited for the elevator. Text message from an unknown number. "This is Investigator Chen. We've received a call from Memorial General's legal department. They're requesting an immediate meeting. I think you rattled some cages." Tom looked over my shoulder at the message and grinned. "Kid, I think you just fired the shot heard round the hospital world." But what I couldn't have predicted was how quickly everything was about to escalate. Because sometimes, when you corner desperate people with evidence of their crimes, they don't surrender quietly. Sometimes they fight back with everything they have, and things get very dangerous, very fast. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver looked like something out of a legal thriller. All marble columns and imposing architecture designed to remind you that justice is serious business. I was sitting in the gallery of Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom at 9:15 on a Thursday morning, watching the most satisfying legal destruction I'd ever witnessed. The past 3 weeks had moved so fast it felt like being caught in a tornado made of subpoenas, depositions, and increasingly desperate phone calls from Memorial General's legal team. "Your Honor," said Assistant U.S. Attorney David Kim, standing at the prosecutor's table with a stack of documents that had to be 6 inches thick. The government moves to compel the immediate production of all payroll records, time management systems data, and administrative correspondence from Memorial General Hospital dating back 24 months. Judge Morrison was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the book. She looked down at the defense table, where 3 lawyers in expensive suits were shuffling papers with the desperate energy of people trying to find a miracle. "Mr. Phillips, I assume you have an objection?" Phillips, the same hospital lawyer who tried to bribe me 3 weeks earlier, stood up with the defeated posture of a man who knew he was drowning. "Your Honor, Memorial General is concerned about patient privacy issues and the confidentiality of proprietary business information." "Patient privacy?" Judge Morrison's voice carried the kind of skepticism that could freeze blood. "Mr. Phillips, we're talking about payroll records and administrative memos. Unless your hospital is paying its employees in medical charts, I fail to see the relevance." The gallery was packed with reporters, hospital employees, and what looked like investigators from multiple federal agencies. I recognized Investigator Chun sitting in the front row, taking notes with the focused intensity of someone building a criminal case. Next to her was someone who'd introduced himself as FBI Special Agent Marcus Johnson, which had been a surreal moment in my life. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, the evidence presented by the government suggests systematic violations of federal labor law. The court finds the government's request entirely reasonable and narrowly tailored. Motion granted. Memorial General Hospital will produce all requested documents within 72 hours. The sound that came from the defense table was barely audible, but I swear it sounded like Phillips was choking on his own tongue. "Your Honor," Phillips tried again, "we respectfully request additional time to review and redact." "Denied. 72 hours, Counselor. And Mr. Phillips, any further delays will result in contempt charges and daily fines that will make your client very unhappy." That's when things got interesting. Phillips leaned over and started whispering urgently to his co-counsel, a younger woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Their conversation became increasingly animated, with lots of head shaking and what appeared to be some kind of internal argument. "Your Honor," the younger lawyer stood up, "could we request a brief recess to consult with our client?" Judge Morrison checked her watch. 10 minutes, Counselor. This court reconvenes at 9:45. As the lawyers filed out for their emergency huddle, I felt someone tap my shoulder. It was Maria Rodriguez, the night shift nurse who'd been too scared to speak up during my confrontation with Harrison. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," she whispered. "They fired Carlos this morning. Carlos Mendez, the janitor who'd been complaining about his missing overtime. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental." "What reason did they give?" "Insubordination. They said he was caught in unauthorized areas during his shift. The filing room on the 3rd floor. They knew someone had been accessing the overtime records, and they were eliminating anyone who might have been involved. Carlos probably didn't even know what he'd stumbled into, but that didn't matter to them." "Maria, you need to talk to the FBI agent sitting in the front row. Agent Johnson. Tell him exactly what you just told me." "I can't. If they fired Carlos for nothing, what do you think they'll do to me?" "They can't fire you for cooperating with a federal investigation. That's witness intimidation, and it's a felony." "Easy for you to say. You don't have 3 kids and a mortgage." I understood her fear, but I also understood something else. They were going to keep destroying people until someone stopped them. The lawyers returned, and Judge Morrison retook the bench. Phillips looked like someone had told him his dog died. "Your Honor, after consultation with our client, Memorial General Hospital would like to amend its position regarding document production." "I'm listening." "We would like to voluntarily produce all requested documents immediately, along with additional materials that may be relevant to the government's investigation." The courtroom went dead silent. Even Judge Morrison looked surprised. "Mr. Phillips, are you saying that your client is now willing to cooperate fully with this investigation?" "Yes, Your Honor. Memorial General recognizes its obligations under federal law and wishes to resolve this matter as quickly as possible." Prosecutor Kim stood up with the expression of someone who smelled a trap. "Your Honor, while we appreciate the defendant's change of heart, the government remains concerned about the completeness and accuracy of any voluntary production." Understood, Mr. Kim. Mr. Phillips, your client's voluntary cooperation is noted, but this court's order stands. 72 hours for complete document production, with the understanding that any omissions or alterations will result in severe sanctions. Understood, Your Honor. But the real fireworks started after court was adjourned. I was walking down the courthouse steps when I heard someone calling my name. It was Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the chief of staff, and she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Sarah, we need to talk. I think we said everything we needed to say in that conference room. Please. 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I stopped walking. Dr. Warren looked around nervously, as if she expected federal agents to jump out from behind the courthouse pillars. I want you to know that I had no idea about the overtime situation until you brought it to our attention. With respect, Dr. Warren, that's either a lie or gross negligence. Either way, it doesn't look good for you. You're right, but I'm trying to fix this. The hospital board met in emergency session last night. Harrison has been terminated, along with 3 other department supervisors. We're implementing new oversight procedures, and we're prepared to make full restitution to all affected employees. What about the federal investigation? Dr. Warren's composure cracked slightly. That's out of our hands now. The FBI has opened a criminal investigation. There may be indictments. Good. Sarah, people are going to go to prison. Careers are going to be destroyed. Families are going to be ruined. I looked at this woman, who'd been running Memorial General for 8 years, who'd probably seen herself as a healer and a leader, and I felt something I didn't expect. Pity. Dr. Warren, those people should have thought about their families before they decided to steal from their employees. You want to know what ruins families? Having to choose between paying rent or buying groceries because your boss stole your overtime. Having to work 3 jobs because the hospital that's supposed to heal people is systematically robbing its own workers. I know you're right. But nothing. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. And justice means that people who commit crimes face consequences. I started walking away, but then turned back. Dr. Warren, if you really want to help, cooperate fully with the investigation. Don't try to protect people who don't deserve protection. And make sure every single employee gets every penny they're owed with interest. We will. I promise you that. Don't promise me. Promise them. That afternoon, I got a call from Investigator Chin. Sarah, we've got the payroll records. All of them. And you were right. This goes much deeper than anyone imagined. How much deeper? Try 18 months of systematic wage theft across 14 departments. Conservative estimate, $800,000 in stolen wages. We've identified patterns of document alteration, signature forgery, and what appears to be money laundering through the management bonus system. $800,000. Nearly $1 million stolen from hospital employees who are already struggling to make ends meet. What happens now? Now we build cases. Criminal cases. The FBI is taking the lead on the racketeering charges, and DOL is handling the labor violations. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. These people are looking at serious prison time, and desperate people do desperate things. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying you should be careful. Very careful. And if anything unusual happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Carlos getting fired, about Dr. Warren's warning about families being destroyed, about Agent Johnson sitting in that courtroom taking notes about federal crimes. But mostly, I kept thinking about the other Sarah, the one who would have stayed quiet, taken the abuse, and let them keep stealing from people who couldn't afford to fight back. That Sarah was gone forever. And honestly, good riddance. 6 months later, I was standing in the same federal courthouse, but this time I wasn't in the gallery. I was at the witness stand, looking directly at Michael Harrison as the prosecutor asked me to identify the man who had torn up my timesheet and threatened my career. Harrison looked like he'd aged 10 years in half that time. Gone was the arrogant supervisor who had humiliated me in front of my coworkers. In his place sat a broken man in an ill-fitting suit, staring at his hands while his lawyer whispered frantically in his ear. Ms. Martinez, Assistant U.S. Attorney Kim continued, can you describe for the jury what happened when you confronted Mr. Harrison about your missing overtime pay? The jury of 12 Denver residents listened intently as I recounted that day in the hospital corridor. But this wasn't just about Harrison anymore. This was about something much bigger, much more devastating than anyone had imagined when I first walked into that Department of Labor office. The federal investigation had uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Memorial General's administration. What started as missing overtime had evolved into a RICO case involving 8 defendants, including the hospital's chief financial officer, 2 board members, and the head of human resources. The scheme hadn't just stolen from employees, it had defrauded Medicare, manipulated financial reports to investors, and created a shadow accounting system designed to hide millions in stolen wages and fraudulent bonuses. During your investigation of the hospital's filing systems, Kim asked, what did you discover about the scope of the wage theft? I found evidence that the scheme affected over 200 employees across 15 departments over a period of 3 years. The total amount stolen was approximately $2.3 million in unpaid wages, plus another $1.8 million in fraudulent management bonuses paid for keeping labor costs artificially low. The number still made my stomach turn. $4.1 million. Stolen from nurses, janitors, lab technicians, dietary workers, maintenance staff, people who were already struggling to pay rent and feed their families in an economy that seemed designed to crush working people. And what happened to that money? According to the financial records we uncovered, the stolen wages were reclassified as operational savings and used to fund executive bonuses, facility renovations, and what the hospital called efficiency incentives for management personnel. I could see Harrison flinch every time I mentioned the bonuses. He'd received over $63,000 in stolen wages over 2 years, money that should have gone to the people who were actually doing the work. But the most damaging testimony came from Carlos Mendez, the janitor who'd been fired for allegedly accessing unauthorized areas. Carlos had been the government's star witness, and his story had destroyed what was left of the defense's credibility. They told me to clean the administrative offices at night. Carlos had testified the day before, his voice steady despite the obvious nervousness. But when I found those papers showing how they were cheating people, I made copies. I got a daughter in college, and I know what it's like when every dollar matters. I couldn't stay quiet about people stealing from working families. It turned out Carlos had been documenting the wage theft for months before I ever started my investigation. He had copies of altered timesheets, recorded conversations with supervisors who bragged about keeping labor costs down, and photographs of the bonus distribution memos that proved the systematic nature of the conspiracy. The defense had tried to paint us as disgruntled employees with an axe to grind. But when the FBI forensic accountants took the stand and walked the jury through spreadsheets showing exactly how the money had been stolen and where it went, the case became undeniable. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Kim said during his closing argument, "this isn't a case about workplace disputes or administrative errors. This is a case about organized crime. The defendants created a criminal enterprise designed to systematically steal from their own employees and then cover up those crimes through document destruction, witness intimidation, and financial fraud." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts for Harrison. Guilty on racketeering charges for the CFO. Guilty on conspiracy and money laundering for 2 of the board members. Guilty across the board for everyone except one HR administrator who'd cooperated early and testified against her co-conspirators. I was in the courthouse cafeteria when the verdicts were read, too nervous to sit in the courtroom and watch. When Agent Johnson found me 20 minutes later, the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "Complete victory," he said, sitting down across from me with what might have been the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in 6 months. Harrison got 8 years. The CFO got 12. The board members got 6 each. Prison. Actual federal prison for people who thought they were untouchable because they wore suits and made 6-figure salaries. What about restitution? Full restitution to all affected employees, plus punitive damages. The hospital's insurance is covering most of it, but the individual defendants are personally liable for their portions. Harrison's looking at about $400,000 in personal damages. $400,000. His house, his savings, his retirement account. All of it would go to compensating the people he'd stolen from. Justice had a price tag, and he was going to pay every penny. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences or the money. The real victory was walking into Memorial General 3 weeks after the trial and seeing how everything had changed. Maria Rodriguez was now the night shift supervisor, promoted after the hospital's new administration decided they needed people with integrity in leadership positions. Carlos Mendez had been rehired with back pay and a formal apology, plus a promotion to head of maintenance services. The new chief of staff had implemented an electronic timekeeping system that made it impossible to alter records without leaving digital fingerprints. Most importantly, they'd installed a direct hotline to the Department of Labor for any employee who suspected wage violations. The hospital had learned that it was cheaper to pay people correctly the first time than to deal with federal investigators and criminal prosecution. "Sarah!" I heard someone call my name as I was leaving the hospital after a routine follow-up meeting about the new policies. It was James Wright, the male nurse who'd witnessed my original confrontation with Harrison. "I wanted to thank you," he said, catching up to me in the parking lot. "I got my settlement check last week. $14,000 in back overtime, plus interest." My wife cried when she saw it. $14,000. Money that should have been his all along. Money he'd earned by working extra shifts and covering for understaffed departments and staying late when patients needed care. "You don't need to thank me, James. You earned that money. I just made sure you got it." "No, it's more than that. You showed us that we don't have to accept being treated like garbage. You showed us that we have power when we stand together." That conversation stayed with me as I drove home to my apartment in Capitol Hill, past the coffee shops and bookstores and small businesses that make Denver feel like a real city instead of just another corporate outpost. I thought about power, about justice, about what happens when working people decide they've had enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Investigator Chen. "Saw the news about Memorial General implementing the new policies. Heard you're thinking about law school." It was true. The whole experience had shown me something about myself I'd never realized. I was good at this. Good at finding evidence, good at building cases, good at fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The University of Denver had accepted me into their evening law program, and I'd be starting classes in the fall while continuing to work as a nurse. Thinking about specializing in labor law, I texted back. "Turns out I have a talent for taking down workplace criminals. The world needs more lawyers like that. Let me know if you ever want to work for DOL. We could use someone with your investigative skills." 6 months ago, I was a nurse who just wanted to be paid for the hours I worked. Now I was planning to become a lawyer who would spend her career making sure other people got paid for the hours they worked. Sometimes life takes you in directions you never expected, and sometimes those directions turn out to be exactly where you needed to go. But there was one more thing I had to do. I drove to Harrison's neighborhood in Highlands Ranch, an upscale suburb where the houses all looked like they'd been designed by the same architect having a bad day. His house, former house, since it was now for sale, sat on a quiet cul-de-sac with a foreclosure sign planted in the perfectly manicured lawn. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat there for a few minutes, looking at the symbol of everything he'd lost because he thought stealing from working people was an acceptable way to fund his lifestyle. Then I drove home, and I never looked back. Because some battles you fight for money, and some battles you fight for justice. But the best battles are the ones you fight for both. 2 years later, I graduated from law school with honors and a job offer from the Department of Labor's Denver office. But the most meaningful moment wasn't walking across the stage or signing my employment contract. It was getting a letter from a nurse in Phoenix who'd heard about our case and used our victory as precedent to file her own wage theft complaint against her hospital. "Dear Ms. Martinez," the letter began, "I saw the news coverage of your case against Memorial General Hospital. I've been dealing with the same kind of overtime theft at my facility for 3 years, but I was too scared to speak up. Your story gave me courage to document everything and file a complaint with the Department of Labor. Today, my hospital agreed to full restitution for all affected employees, over $800,000 total. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to accept being stolen from." That letter is framed on my office wall now, right next to my law degree and a photograph of all the Memorial General employees who received settlement checks. Because that's what victory really looks like, not just winning your own battle, but inspiring other people to fight theirs. The final settlement from Memorial General totaled $6.2 million in restitution, penalties, and punitive damages. Every single affected employee received full compensation for their stolen wages, plus interest and damages. The hospital implemented comprehensive labor law compliance programs and hired an independent monitor to ensure ongoing compliance. Harrison served 6 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $487,000 in personal restitution. The CFO got 8 years and forfeiture of all assets purchased with stolen funds. The hospital's board was completely replaced, and new policies required all overtime to be pre-approved and electronically documented. But the ripple effects went far beyond Memorial General. The case became a template for federal prosecutors handling wage theft cases, and the documentation methods we developed have been used in dozens of similar investigations across the country. The Department of Labor cited our case in new enforcement guidelines, and 3 states have passed legislation specifically targeting systematic wage theft in healthcare facilities. As for me, I'm now a senior labor investigator with DOL, and I specialize in complex wage theft cases involving healthcare systems. I've helped recover over $23 million in stolen wages for more than 3,000 workers across 12 states. Every case reminds me that workplace theft isn't just about money, it's about dignity, respect, and the fundamental principle that people deserve to be paid for their work. The best part is getting calls from workers who've heard about our cases and want to know their rights. Just last week, I talked to a janitor in Miami whose supervisor was altering his timesheets. Today, I'm reviewing documentation from a group of lab technicians in Seattle who discovered their night shift differentials were being systematically denied. Sometimes people ask me if I regret leaving nursing for law. But I'm still healing people. I'm just doing it by ensuring they can afford food, housing, and health care for their families. Because that's what healthcare really is, making sure people can live with dignity and security. What do you think about fighting back against workplace theft? Have you ever had to battle for money you rightfully earned? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe workers deserve justice and dignity in the workplace.